mark my words, boy. When it finally happens, it's going to start here. Most people have that one relative, the basement-dwelling older brother, who is convinced that Illuminati are hunting him. Or that kooky cousin who tells anybody who will listen about her UFO abduction experience. For me, it was my Uncle Silas. For many years, I didn't even know that I had an uncle. He was the black sheep of the family, and it was easy to see why. He lived in a tiny, rundown house on the edge of town, so overgrown that it could barely be seen from the street. The first time I saw the place, with its dark, dusty windows and peeling white paint, I got a creeping sensation on my neck. It was a tick. The yard was full of them. My father rushed me past the tall bushes and through the rusty screen door as quickly as possible. I was 7 years old during that first visit to my Uncle Silas's house, and all I wanted to do was go home. The house was a gloomy mess, full of cobwebs and crumbling stacks of magazines. Uncle Silas himself was even eerier. The fringes of his white hair and his long, untrimmed fingernails were yellowing, and he had this smell to him that I couldn't identify. Not back then. If it wasn't for my family obligations, I would have run screaming out the door. My father, James Judge Jim Barrett, was a local justice of the peace, and he took his responsibilities seriously. Before we walked into Uncle Silas's house that day, he had told me what to expect, and explained that he didn't want to be there any more than I did, but that this was simply something we had to do. I should be on my best behavior and try to remember that not everyone had the same advantages that we did. All of that was easier said than done, especially when Uncle Silas put his grimy hand on my shoulder and started talking about numerology. Apparently that was what most of his old magazines were about, using the numbers in the Bible to foretell the future. Uncle Silas's explanation was cut short, however, when a very large, very naked woman walked out through the bead curtain that separated the living room from the rest of the house. She raised an eyebrow at us, grabbed a matchbook from a coffee table, and lit a cigarette. When my father spluttered an objection, Uncle Silas waved it away. "This house is clothing optional." That was our sign that it was time to go. Years would pass before I visited that decrepit white house again, although I did continue to see Uncle Silas at family gatherings from time to time. Whenever we crossed paths, he would take me aside and ramble about whatever he happened to be studying at the time. For some reason, he seemed to have taken a liking to me. "You're not like the others," Uncle Silas had told me once. "I can see it in your eyes." At the time, I wasn't sure what he meant. The truth was, I never paid much attention to Uncle Silas's speeches. He obviously wasn't the fairy tale evil wizard that I'd imagined him to be when I was a child. He was just a strange, confused old man. "It wouldn't be long," my father often commented, "before we need to think about putting him in a care home." At our last family reunion, everything changed. We'd expected Uncle Silas to be the same as always, gleefully ranting on about lizard people and fluoride in the water supply, while devouring an obscene amount of sweet potato casserole. Instead, he looked sunken-eyed and haunted, like he hadn't slept for days. "I've cracked the code. All the signs point to it. It's coming any day now." "What is?" I asked, in spite of myself. "Armageddon." Uncle Silas was ordinarily thrilled when one of his batty theories came true, but that afternoon, he seemed overcome by a terrible sadness. He was so affected by his prediction that I almost found myself believing in it too. But the sun was shining, families were waving to one another in their suburban driveways. There were no air raid sirens, no angelic trumpets, no sulfur raining from the sky. Whatever my uncle thought he had discovered, the world outside was carrying on as usual. Then came today. A Saturday. I hadn't set any alarm, and even Judge Jim slept in on his days off. My mother was usually up early with my 2-year-old sister, Allie. But for some reason, we had all slept in that morning. I didn't understand why until after I had already staggered to the bathroom, chugged a glass of water, and looked out the window. The sun hadn't come up. My eyes drifted to the wall clock. It was almost 10 a.m. But the outside was as black as midnight. People had their porch lights on. Mrs. Hazelwood next door was standing in her yard in her fluffy pink bathrobe, glaring at the sky like she wanted to report it to the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. Must be a big storm coming through, my father had said, taking a swig of coffee. He was saying it to comfort me. I could tell. In truth, my father was just as confused by the darkness as I was. On the television screen behind him, a newscaster in the next town over was showing bright, sunny skies. Before we could speculate further, my little sister Allie called out from the kitchen, "Papa? There's a man in the backyard." My father and I both ran to her. Sure enough, a figure was standing just beyond the porch light's reach. As soon as we appeared in the window, it shuffled forward just a bit. And it smiled. It looked like an ordinary 40-something man, although his hair and skin were sort of dusty and gray. His gums, too, seemed to have receded. It was almost as if they had rotted. "Do you know that guy?" I asked. "I don't think so." My father shook his head. "But he looks an awful lot like... No, it can't be. Come on." He tugged the curtains shut. "Let's go." My father did recognize the man outside. I could tell by the hardness in his glare as he looked out the window. There was only one place Judge Jim was likely to know him from, however. Court. There was a good chance that man was one of the criminals who my father had sentenced. Growing up, it had always been a fear of mine that an angry convict would one day show up to wreak vengeance upon our family. Judge Jim had always done his best to reassure my sister and I that countless fail-safes were in place to ensure that didn't happen. Our address and phone number were unlisted, and the police kept my father up to date about any threats or unusual movements made by the people my father had convicted. Not that there were a lot of them still around. In another time period, my father would have been considered a hanging judge. He gave harsh sentences and usually sided with the prosecution. Or at least, that's what everyone said. Growing up, I knew that Judge Jim was an important figure in town, but I tried not to let it get to me. To me, he was just Dad. And besides, people seem to approve of his methods. If not, then why keep electing him year after year? Now, after having seen that grim-faced figure in the backyard, it occurred to me that those he'd condemned might have a very different point of view. My father was going from room to room, closing the blinds, turning out the lights. My little sister asked what was going on. My father told her that we needed to save power, but I knew better. He was trying to make it look like there was no one in the house. With the curtains closed, the sky outside inky black, and the living room lit up by only a single nightlight, the cozy suburban home I'd grown up in suddenly felt eerie and unfamiliar. The wall clock read 11:16 a.m. "I don't know what's going on out there. Well, this'll be one for the history books," my father said cheerfully, trying to raise our spirits. "Still, can't be too careful. During unusual times, people don't act like themselves." He lowered himself into his armchair, picked up a legal journal, and began to read by the dim glow of the nightlight. My little sister Allie looked unconvinced, but she opened her toy box and began to play half-heartedly with her Legos. In the kitchen, I could hear the roar of the faucet as my mother filled bottle after bottle. She was expecting the water to be cut off at any time. I thought back to my trip to the pantry for a midnight snack the night before. How many cans of beans and rice did we have? How long would they last? A week? Even less? There was a slow, heavy knock at the door. My father bolted upright in his chair and went to look out through the front door peephole. Whatever he saw out there made his face go pale. He stumbled back to his armchair like a sleepwalker, then extracted something from the drawer beside it. A .38 revolver. I knew my father owned a pistol and that he had a concealed carry permit, but I had never known where he kept it. Until now. You kids get your bedrooms. Now! His voice was more like a growl. I grabbed Allie's hand and dragged her squealing up the stairs. From the first floor, I heard an enormous thud that shook the front door on its hinges. I locked us inside Allie's bedroom, not that I thought it would do much good, and grabbed the closest thing to a weapon I had at hand, a hockey stick. Although I knew my father wouldn't approve, I couldn't resist the urge to peer behind the curtain. There were 17 of them, maybe more. 4 of them were slamming themselves against the front door downstairs. 2 others were preparing to hurl a rock through the living room window. I shouted a warning just as the glass shattered, and the grisly mob looked up. Their bodies were in varying states of decay, but the same unearthly light burned in what was left of their eyes. It was the light of hate. I was sure I knew at least one of those rotting faces. Carol Haynes, a woman whom my father had sentenced to life in prison after her child's negligent death. Carol had been a street worker, and her little boy had gotten out of the house and run into traffic while she was entertaining a client. His ruling on the case had been controversial. Plenty of people had taken Carol's side, arguing that she was just doing what she had to do to survive, and that she was genuinely heartbroken over the loss of her child. Judge Jim, however, was not known for his mercy. He handed down the maximum sentence, and Carol Haynes died in a prison hospital 10 years later. Some claimed that she had died of a broken heart. Now, what was left of her was standing in our front yard, her blackish-purple guts trailing behind her through the neatly trimmed grass. Her yellowing, skeletal teeth locked in a gleeful grin of vengeance. Another rock smashed through the window beside me. Allie shrieked. I picked her up and jogged across the hallway to my bedroom. From there, I planned to climb out the window, lower us both into the backyard, and run. A gunshot rang out from the living room below. As I pulled back my curtain, bony fingers grazed against mine. The window was already open, and my great Aunt Ethel was squatting outside of it. The 7 years that she'd been buried had reduced her skin to a sort of blue-gray, rubbery leather, but her empty eye sockets blazed with the same hateful light as the others outside. I didn't have to wonder what she was doing there. When I was a kid, I'd always hated visiting Great Aunt Ethel. Her creepy, doll-filled house smelled like mothballs and old perfume, and she refused to let children play indoors. I always tried to get my parents to leave as quickly as possible. And when she died, I talked them out of attending her funeral, so that I could go to a middle school dance the same weekend. At the time, she had seemed like a stuck-up hag who deserved what she got. But now that I was older, I could see that my actions had deprived her of the family she had left. And apparently, she still hadn't forgiven me for it. Her hands reached out for my throat. The hockey stick connected with her hollow chest. That blow should have sent the sad sack of bones flying backwards off the roof. But whatever force was giving her life had also given her unnatural strength. My mother's scream echoed from downstairs. Pulling Allie behind me, I sprinted to the bathroom, where I finally found a secure, unbroken window. I could hear Aunt Ethel's carcass scrambling down the hallway, as I helped Allie cling to the window ledge and prepare to jump. My palms began to sweat. If I fell just right, I could catch Allie and roll without breaking anything. I gasped as I dropped through empty air, but I landed without a hitch. I was proud of Allie for not crying out as she let herself drop. But our troubles were far from over. Our quiet suburban neighborhood was in chaos. A house at the end of the street was on fire. 2 doors down, old Mr. Hugolette was sprawled in his driveway, with his ex-wife's one-armed corpse gnawing on his face. Mr. Hugolette must have been trying to flee. His car keys sparkled in the grass a few feet away from his outstretched hand. The garage door was open, and his '68 Mustang convertible gleamed invitingly within. I had only had my driver's permit for a few months, but it looked like the best chance that Allie and I were going to get. I pressed my fingers to my lips, warning Allie to keep to the bushes. There had been no more gunshots from the living room, and I had a sickening feeling that I knew what had happened to my parents. I crept towards Mr. Hugolette and his attacker, trying not to think about the gnashing sounds coming from where he laid. His dead ex-wife didn't look up from her gruesome work as I tiptoed closer, grabbed the keys, and bolted for the Mustang. The engine rumbled for a few vertigo-inducing seconds, then turned over. I jammed it into gear and whistled for Allie, who ran out of the shrubbery and leapt into the passenger seat. Caught in the glow of the headlights, the thing straddling Mr. Hugolette finally looked up. I stepped on the gas, and the crunch it made as the tires rolled over it felt like the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. More of those bright-eyed figures roamed the streets. Screams came from all around, and the streetlights were hazy with smoke. By the time we reached the end of the block, they had gone out altogether. Tire streaks on the road, crashed and burning cars, fallen wires. Signs of devastation were everywhere. I had Allie dial 911 as I drove, but I wasn't surprised when the only response was a busy signal. I had been driving for several minutes by the time I realized where I was taking us. Uncle Silas's house. Whether I'd chosen it because it was on the outskirts of town, or because he was the only nearby family member who I could think of, I wasn't sure. But somehow, the choice felt right. Before long, we came across our first obstacle. A snarl of smashed cars in the middle of the road. I turned down a side alley, only to find that it too was blocked by a fallen telephone pole. One of the bright-eyed ones walked out into the street behind us, and our eyes met in the rear view. Kyle Houseman, a kid from my class who had taken his own life last year. Memories of school flashed through my mind. Not memories in which I'd bullied Kyle. Not exactly, anyway. But I had been there, smirking while others did the dirty work. Then, when it was over, I had looked away, afraid that if I showed any sympathy to Kyle, his tormentors would turn on me as well. Kyle's arms were soaked in blood. He'd clearly had a busy night. His torso snapped as he spun toward us and began to charge. I reversed as fast as I could, wincing and apologizing silently to Mr. Hugolette as I crashed the rear bumper of his Mustang into a brick wall. A tire had burst, but at least my plan had worked. Kyle's corpse was pinned in place. Or so I thought. To my horror, I heard the scrape of metal and felt the car begin to roll. He was pulling himself free. I grabbed Allie's hand and started running. We were only a few blocks from Uncle Silas's place, but if we didn't move quickly, it wouldn't matter. I racked my brain, trying to think of who else among the dead I might have somehow offended. But is it really possible to know all the people you've heard across a lifetime? How many of my snide comments or refusals to help someone in need had lingered in someone else's mind, festering in whatever grim waiting room came after death? Any one of the bright-eyed corpses walking the streets could have been a homeless man whose plea for change I turned away, or some long-forgotten substitute teacher who I'd put through hell as a middle schooler. There was no way to be sure. But one thing was clear. The dead were finally having their day, and no one was safe from their vengeance. Several of the bright-eyed ones watched me as I passed, But there was no recognition in those empty, glowing sockets. Whoever they were after tonight, it wasn't me. Kyle Houseman, however, was another story. He had pulled himself free of the car and was dragging himself forward along the sidewalk behind us. And he wasn't the only one. An elderly woman was crawling like a spider down the front of the post office. Her body rotted apart from a curly wig. I knew that wig. In my first job at the chain grocery store in town, there was a woman who always tried to pay with expired coupons. The wig woman, we had called her. I had always turned her down, telling her it was against company policy. And when she raised her voice at me, I'd had security throw her out. Only later did it occur to me that she might have desperate, humiliating reasons for trying to get every discount she could. I wasn't even aware that she had died. Yet, here she was, opening her twisted jaws wide. Allie couldn't run as fast as her grisly bones could scramble, so I picked my little sister up and pressed her head against my chest. Just 2 streets more, and we would be at Uncle Silas's. Others had given chase behind me, but I didn't turn to see who they were or try to divine what they had against me. Kyle flung something past my head. He was gaining, but we were so close. There was Uncle Silas's overgrown front porch. A soft light was on inside. Something moved behind the beaded curtain, and my heart leapt. Uncle Silas was home. He knew that we were coming. The door to the dim living room opened as soon as we reached it. To my surprise, Uncle Silas didn't rush us inside and lock it behind us. Instead, he stepped past us, toward Kyle Houseman, what was left of the wig woman, and the others who had given chase. "I know what you want. You can't have it." Uncle Silas crossed his arms. "Take me instead." The dead hesitated, unsure. "Go on. You heard me. Gotten everything I've wanted out of this life. My niece and nephew here, they haven't even had a chance to start. Take me instead." I crouched on the shag carpet behind the coffee table, sheltering Allie with my body and waiting for the end. These things had been nursing their grudges somewhere beyond time. They wouldn't just stop because Uncle Silas had offered to exchange his life for ours. Would they? When I dared to look again, the 3 bright-eyed corpses were shuffling backwards into the night. "Is it over?" I asked Uncle Silas. "Are we safe?" "Safe." Uncle Silas snorted as he struck a match and lit his pipe. "Boy, you're out of your mind. Take a look out there. The end is just beginning." As he spoke, fire lit up the ink-black sky. Comets were streaking down from the heavens. The second stage of the apocalypse had just begun. What's happening here is only going to spread. It's only a matter of time before this town loses touch with the outside world. So I want to send out this final warning. One last transmission before we're swallowed by darkness. It begins with black skies. Then the dead walk the streets, and fire falls from the sky. After that, who can say? I suppose it doesn't matter. We'll all be finding out soon enough.
Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupeHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.